You know that feeling, right? A new public health scare hits, and suddenly there's this swirl of confusion. You've got news alerts popping up everywhere, the advice seems to change by the hour, and there's just this deep uncertainty. Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the actual science of how officials try to cut through all that noise. We're looking at the playbook for communicating in a crisis, and it's all based on some fascinating research from the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. Okay, so let's just get right to it. This is the big question, isn't it? A new virus shows up, and almost instantly the public message just feels chaotic. It can seem contradictory or maybe just plain confusing. Why is it so incredibly hard for the people in charge to get it right? This quote really gets to the heart of the problem. You see, experts aren't communicating into some calm, quiet library. No, they're shouting into a storm of really powerful emotions. These feelings, the fear, the anxiety, the frustration, they aren't just a side effect of the crisis. They are the crisis environment. And in that kind of environment, the normal rules of communication just completely break down. In fact, they can even make things a whole lot worse. So if we want to understand how to solve this communication puzzle, we have to start by getting our terms straight. We often hear risk communication and crisis communication used like they're the same thing. But for the experts, there's a really clear and super important line between them. And this really lays out that key difference. Think of risk communication as the long game. It's all the stuff you do before the emergency. It's proactive, it's about building relationships, sharing info, and creating trust when things are calm. Crisis communication, that's reactive. It's what you have to do right now, in the moment, when the fire alarm is already blaring. So to really get why crisis messaging is so difficult, we have to take a look at our own brains. Because when we're under a ton of fear and stress, we are just not wired to be these calm, rational machines that process information perfectly. This quote just nails it. During a public health emergency, perception is reality. It doesn't really matter what the objective statistical risk is. What matters is what we feel the risk is. And communicators have to navigate this messy, emotional landscape of belief and fear, not some clean, neat world of facts and figures. Okay, so let's look at the first big psychological theory here. It's called the mental noise model. The idea is actually pretty simple, but it's profound. When we are highly stressed, our ability to absorb complex information just plummets. This is exactly why throwing a super detailed 50-page scientific report at the public during an outbreak is pretty much guaranteed to fail. This is the perfect way to think about it. Imagine you're trying to follow a really complicated recipe, but there's a smoke alarm just screaming right next to your ear. That stress, that's the alarm. You just can't focus on the details. And that's why simple, clear, and repeated messages are the only things that have a shot at cutting through all that mental noise. Now, while that mental noise is going full blast, our brains do something else that makes communication even trickier. This brings us to what's called the negative dominance model. It basically explains why bad news seems to travel so much faster and hit so much harder. When we're upset, our brains are wired to hunt for threats, so we give way more psychological weight to negative news than to any positive news. Just one scary headline can totally wipe out 10 reassuring facts. For the people in public health, this isn't just some interesting theory. It's a practical reality they have to deal with every single day. You can't just fight one negative message with one positive one. Nope. The research shows it takes multiple positive, solution-focused messages just to even things out in the public's mind. And all this brings us to the final and maybe the most important piece of this psychological puzzle, trust determination theory. Here's the deal. When people are stressed, our default setting is to distrust authority. This means that trust isn't something you can just whip up in the middle of a crisis. It's like a bank account. You have to make small, consistent deposits over a long time, so you have something to draw from when things get really tough. Okay, so knowing all this tricky stuff about human psychology, how do experts actually get ready for a crisis? Let's take a look at the playbook they use. We're moving from the why this is so hard to the how you can actually do it right. A huge framework that people use is the CDC's Crisis and Emergency Risk Communication Model, or CIRC for short. And what it shows is that communication isn't just one single action, it's a cycle with clear phases. It starts with pre-crisis, that's when you make those trust deposits we were just talking about, and it goes all the way to evaluation, which is where you figure out what went wrong so you can do better next time. And when you boil down all the different guidelines, a few golden rules start to appear. First, you've got to engage with communities. Don't just talk at them. Second, be clear, be consistent, and be transparent. Third,
Tailor your message for different groups, because one size definitely does not fit all. And finally, and this is a big one, always explain the complexities and what you're still uncertain about.
Okay, so we have the psychology and we have the playbook. But how does all this theory actually hold up in the complete chaos of a real-world event? Let's look at what the research says we've learned from outbreaks in the past. Events like the SARS outbreak back in 2003 and the H1N1 flu pandemic in 2009, these were massive, real-world stress tests for all of these theories. These were the moments where the playbooks were put to the test, and they revealed both the strengths and some really critical weaknesses in our approach. And honestly, the lessons we've learned are pretty sobering. Time and time again, the reports show a communication breakdown with communities, a deep fracture in public trust, and a real challenge in coordinating messages across different countries and cultures. The bottom line is, despite all the planning, building, and keeping, trust is still the single biggest hurdle. But maybe the most important lesson of all is captured in this quote from risk communication expert Peter Sandman. The old way of thinking was to project absolute confidence, to pretend you had all the answers. But the new and much more effective model is to be radically transparent about what you don't know. Saying, here's what we know for sure, here's what we're not sure about yet, and here's what we're doing to find out. Well, that's one of the most powerful ways to build real, lasting trust. So when you put it all together, the conclusion is pretty clear. We have the science, we have the playbooks, we have the tough lessons learned from the past. We know that good communication comes down to transparency and trust that was built long before the emergency ever started. So the final question isn't just whether officials will be ready to communicate, it's whether we, as the public, will be ready to listen.